They passed the jokes around the dinner table right along with the mashed potatoes. "So, Hailey, got another big dream to tell us about?" my uncle asked, and everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I was sitting there with a paper plate because all the real dishes had been used up before I arrived. I smiled as small as I could and took my plate to go. I walked out to the driveway, sat in my car, and made myself a promise right there in the dark. I would never, ever eat anyone's pity again. I would never sit at a table where people treated my dreams like punchlines. I drove home to my tiny apartment and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was determination made of steel. I started working night shifts at a warehouse across town, scanning boxes until my fingers ached and my eyes blurred. The place was chaos. Broken shipping labels everywhere, trucks arriving late, orders getting doubled or lost completely. Money was leaking out of that operation like water through a sieve, and nobody seemed to notice or care. During my breaks, I'd sit in the break room with my old laptop that took 5 minutes just to turn on. I opened a blank spreadsheet file and just stared at it for a while. Then I started typing. Orders in, orders out, cost per unit, time per shipment. I was building something, even though I didn't quite know what yet. But it felt important, like I was finally doing something that mattered. I spent 2 weeks building a simple dashboard on that dying laptop. Orders coming in, orders going out, cost per unit calculated automatically. I color-coded everything. Red meant waste and problems. Green meant efficiency and wins. The first time I tested it on real warehouse data, it caught a major mistake in under 5 minutes. A supplier had been double charging us for months, and nobody had noticed. I took a deep breath and emailed a local distributor I'd found online. I explained what my tool could do and asked if they'd be willing to look at a demo. Then I held my breath and waited. I checked my email about 100 times that day, my heart racing every single time. 3 days later, the distributor owner wrote back, "Let's try your tool for a month and see what happens." I nearly cried reading those words. In week 2 of using my dashboard, his freight costs dropped by almost 20%. He found inefficiencies he didn't even know existed. He paid my small invoice that same night, and it was the first real money I'd made from my own work. I doubled down after that. I quit the warehouse job and moved onto a friend's floor to save money. I slept next to boxes of her stuff with my laptop charging beside me and hope burning in my chest like a small, stubborn fire. Every morning, I woke up and got back to work building something bigger. My younger sister Tori called me one afternoon, excited and talking fast. "Hailey, I just landed a job at Northline Brands. It's a real company with a real boss and benefits and everything." I could hear the unspoken comparison in her voice. "Unlike you. Unlike your little project." I just said, "That's great, Tori. I'm happy for you," and kept coding. That same week, a buyer from a company I didn't even know existed asked if I could do a demo call. When I joined the video meeting, there were 3 different suppliers on the call, all wanting to see what I'd built. My hands shook as I shared my screen, but I made myself sound confident and clear. I showed them clean numbers during that demo. No fancy graphics, no spinning things around, just pure truth presented clearly. Orders tracked accurately, costs broken down, waste identified immediately. The buyer was quiet for a minute after I finished, and I thought maybe I'd lost them. Then she said, "Send me the contract. We want to start next month." I almost dropped my phone. At 2 in the morning, high on adrenaline and cheap coffee, I officially registered Harbor Suite Holdings as a real company. I signed the paperwork as founder and CEO, even though I was still sleeping on someone's floor. I did it quietly, without telling anyone. My family didn't need to know yet. I wanted to build something undeniable first. My life became a simple pattern after that. Morning coffee while answering customer emails. Noon calls with potential clients. Night coding to improve the platform. I hired my first employee, a developer named Nina who was brilliant and patient with my questions. Then I hired Jules to handle customer success because I was drowning in support requests. We asked what probably seemed like dumb questions to each other, but we fixed smart problems. Slowly, our cash flow changed from a tiny trickle to an actual stream. Real money was coming in regularly. I moved into my own apartment, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Every small win felt like proof that I'd been right to keep going when everyone else thought I was wasting my time. At a family lunch a few months later, my dad asked if I wanted to move back into my old bedroom at their house. Save some money, you know. We worry about you, Hailey. My mom nodded with that concerned look parents get. I said no as politely as I could. I'm doing fine. I'm working. They exchanged that look, the one that said they didn't really believe me but didn't want to argue. That night, I got an email that made my hands shake. A regional chain with 5 distribution sites wanted to run a pilot program with Harbor Suite. 5 sites meant 5 times the revenue I was currently making. It meant growth I'd only dreamed about. I said yes before they could change their minds. Tori started talking about her boss Nelson all the time. She'd call me and tell me stories about how he ran things at Northline. He shouted on speakerphone during meetings and loved putting pressure on people to perform. She said it like it was impressive. You wouldn't last a week in this environment, Hailey. It's hardcore. I just listened and didn't argue. That same evening, Nina sent me a profit margin chart from our latest client. The line went up and to the right like a sunrise, steady and beautiful. We were making real money now, and more importantly, we were actually helping companies stop wasting resources. I looked at that chart for a long time, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. A supply chain analyst named Diego reached out asking if I was hiring. He had 10 years of experience, way more than someone at my level usually got to work with. Hiring him felt like a huge risk financially, but something in my gut said to do it anyway. Within his first month, Diego found that several of our clients' vendors were overcharging them by an average of 14%. 14% they'd just been accepting as normal. We issued our first official savings report with my name printed at the bottom as founder and CEO. When I held that printed report in my hands, they were shaking. This was real. This was actually working. We were building something that mattered. At a supply chain trade show, I was standing by our tiny booth when a procurement VP from a major company stopped by. She looked at our materials and whispered, "If you had implementation muscle, real services and support, I'd replace our current agency tomorrow. They're bleeding us dry." Implementation muscle meant building a whole services division, not just software. It meant hiring consultants and project managers. It meant becoming a much bigger company. That night in my hotel room, I opened a new presentation deck. I titled it Harbor Suite Services. Then I started building out what that could look like. If we were going to grow, we needed to grow smart. We needed to become the kind of company that could actually replace the agencies that were failing their clients. I formed a small advisory board to help guide the company's growth. An HR professional, a finance veteran, and a retired plant manager who'd run operations for 30 years. They met with me monthly and asked tough questions I didn't always want to answer. They pushed hard for an acquisition strategy to speed up our services expansion. By a company that already has the infrastructure, they said. We started looking at agencies in our space. One name kept coming up in complaints from multiple sources. Vendors saying they paid late. Clients saying they marked up costs and hid fees. That agency was Northline Brands, my sister's company. The place where she worked for the boss she admired so much. We pulled every public filing we could find on Northline. We talked to their vendors, their freelancers, their former employees. The picture that emerged was ugly. Northline routinely paid freelancers months late, sometimes not at all. They marked up media buys and supply costs by huge percentages without telling clients. They hid fees inside something they called bundle rates that nobody could actually track or verify. It was a mess of unethical practices hidden behind professional-looking presentations. My advisory board voted to pursue an acquisition, but only after a complete financial audit. We needed to know exactly how deep the problems went before we committed to anything. I agreed, even though my stomach was in knots knowing Tori worked there. Sunday dinner happened again at my parents' house. This time I brought dessert from a nice bakery, not homemade because I didn't have time anymore. Tori was there, and she'd just gotten a promotion. To real careers, my uncle said, raising his glass and looking pointedly at me. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. I let it pass without comment. I smiled and ate my food and left early, saying I had work in the morning. On Monday morning, our letter of intent to acquire Northline landed in their corporate inbox. Our lawyers sent it directly to their executive team. The process was beginning, whether Tori knew it or not. Whether my family believed in me or not. The first meeting with Nelson was exactly what I expected. He walked into our conference room 15 minutes late and way too loud. He looked at me and my small team and barely hid his smirk. He called Harbor Suite, a spreadsheet with lipstick on it, like he was being clever. I smiled politely and asked if he could provide us with his complete vendor list and client contracts for our due diligence review. His expression shifted when our legal counsel slid the audit scope document across the table. Page after page of financial records we'd be examining. Client interviews we'd be conducting. Vendor payments we'd be tracking. He realized this wasn't just a conversation. This was serious. And we weren't playing around. I ran into Tori completely by accident in the lobby of a shared office building where Northline rented conference space. We nearly walked right into each other. She looked surprised to see me there. "What are you doing here?" she asked. I said I had a meeting. She got excited. "Oh, we're meeting with some tech company today. Your boss is probably here for the same thing." I looked at her carefully and said as gently as I could, "Tori, I am my boss." Her smile twitched and froze on her face. She opened her mouth like she was going to ask what I meant, but the elevator doors opened and she had to get in. I watched those doors close and knew the truth was going to come out soon. At Northline's quarterly all-hands meeting, Nelson got up on stage to rally the troops. Someone had left his microphone hot, and he didn't realize it at first. He was talking to someone off to the side, bragging about padding hours on client invoices and teaching interns a lesson about the real world by not paying them what they were owed. Phones came out everywhere. People were recording. The HR director in the front row turned pale white. I was sitting in the back as an observer during the acquisition process. I stood up, walked down the aisle, and stepped onto that stage. Nelson turned and looked at me like I was nobody. I took the microphone from his hand and introduced myself to the entire room. "Good morning. I'm Hailey Chin, founder and CEO of Harbor Suite Holdings. We're in the process of acquiring this company." You could have heard a pin drop. Nelson just stared at me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "You're the founder?" he finally said. "You're the CEO?" I said yes clearly into the microphone, and my voice echoed through that big room. I explained that we'd be implementing a transition period with complete financial audits, back pay reviews for anyone who'd been cheated, and new fair contracts for all vendors and freelancers. I saw Tori in the crowd, and her face was completely white. She looked like her entire world had just turned upside down. Because it had. Our audit team moved into Northline's offices the next week. Diego and Nina built an actual wall in our war room, covering it with purchase orders placed side by side with records of actual work completed. The red flags stacked up like bricks. Thousands of dollars charged for work that was never done. Supplies that were never delivered. Hours that were never worked. Diego found 3 shadow vendors that all traced back to one manager's cousin. The cousin was getting paid for services that didn't exist. It was fraud, plain and simple, and it was everywhere we looked. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. And Nelson's signature was on most of it. We opened a dedicated hotline for unpaid invoices and contract disputes. My email inbox flooded with messages from freelancers who'd been waiting months, sometimes over a year, to get paid for work they'd completed. Graphic designers, writers, consultants, analysts, all of them owed money by Northline. Jules organized a systematic payout plan, prioritizing the oldest debts and the people who needed the money most urgently. HR started scheduling interviews with every employee to understand the real culture and who'd been part of the problems versus who'd just been trying to survive. It was overwhelming work, but it was necessary. We couldn't just buy this company and walk away. We had to actually fix it. HR flagged Tori's team during their cultural review. They'd been operating under what the report called intense pressure culture, but her team's financial records were clean. No fake invoices, no padding, no shadow vendors. She'd been following Nelson's aggressive management style, but she hadn't participated in any of the fraud. She'd just been doing her job the way she was told to do it. I asked HR if I could meet with her privately before anything became official. My heart was pounding when I made that request. She was my sister, but she was also an employee of a company I was acquiring. I had to handle this carefully and fairly, both as her sister and as a CEO. We sat in a small, windowless conference room. Just the two of us. I told her everything we'd found. The fraud, the unpaid workers, the fake vendors, all of it. I explained what it meant for Northline and for Nelson specifically. She was quiet for a long time, just staring at her hands folded on the table. Finally, she whispered, "I mocked you at every family dinner. I laughed at your dreams. I'm so sorry, Hailey." Her voice broke. Outside that conference room, our legal team was finalizing the findings report for the board. But in that moment, I was just a sister sitting across from another sister. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You didn't know," I said. "But now you do." The board met for 6 hours reviewing everything we'd uncovered. At the end, they voted unanimously to remove Nelson for cause. No severance, no golden parachute, nothing. They voted to establish a dedicated fund to repay all freelancers and vendors who'd been cheated. They approved a complete cleanup plan that included new HR training, strict caps on billable hours, transparent pricing for all clients, and fair pay standards for everyone. We scheduled a company-wide town hall and invited press to attend. This wasn't going to be handled quietly behind closed doors. We were going to own what Northline had done wrong and explain exactly how we planned to fix it. Transparency was the only way forward. I stood at the microphone in front of 300 Northline employees and a dozen reporters. My voice shook at first, then got stronger. We're owning a past we didn't create, but we chose to buy. We're going to fix it. We're going to pay back every dollar that's owed. And we're going to do it all in daylight where everyone can see. Cameras clicked. People asked questions. After the town hall ended, Nelson tried to spin the story online, posting about aggressive business tactics and misunderstandings. Then our auditor's letter went public, laying out the fraud in detail with Nelson's signature on dozens of documents. His narrative collapsed within hours. The truth was louder than his lies ever could be. 6 months later, I invited my family to Harbor Suite's new office for a tour. I showed them the wall covered in paid invoices, every single freelancer finally compensated for their work. I showed them the board crowded with thank you notes from clients, vendors, and employees. I showed them Tori's office where she now ran a clean, ethical, successful team. She reported directly to me, and she was good at her job when she didn't have someone like Nelson pushing her to cut corners. My dad looked around at everything and finally said, "We were wrong about you, Hailey. We were so wrong." I smiled and said simply, "I was just working." The whole time, I was just working. When the office lights dimmed that evening and everyone went home, I stood alone in that space I'd built from nothing. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, truly full.